Mayberry RFD will not be presented tonight, but will return next week at its regularly scheduled time over most of these stations. The Draft Lottery, a live report on tonight's picking of the birth dates for the draft. Here at Selective Service Headquarters in Washington is CBS News correspondent Roger Mudd.
Good evening. It was 29 years ago that the first and most famous lottery number, 158, was drawn as the United States entered World War II. Tonight, for the first time in 27 years, the United States has again started a draft lottery. And the famous first pick tonight is September 14th, the first birthday that now is designated 001, which means for 19-year-olds born on September 14th, that beginning in January, local draft boards will induct those men born on September 14th, barring deferments. The next birthday in order, April 24th, and so on down the line this evening. This ceremony, which began at 8 o'clock, is now more than two-thirds through. This evening, this has been a very systematic, almost mechanical lottery, the first really nationally televised lottery we've ever had. There's been little excitement here, but for one or two brief occasions, 4 or 5 of the Youth Advisory Council members declined to participate, claiming that they thought they were being used by the Nixon administration to give a youth approval to the lottery system. The main information we have this evening, of course, is the order of the birthdays. And those will determine how the 19-year-olds next year, those from 19 to 26, will be subject to the draft. So let's go down the list and give you the ascending order in which they were drawn tonight. These are in ascending order. It is generally agreed, stipulated by the Selective Service people, that those men with the lowest numbers, the lowest third, will be drafted. The middle group, that is the group with the numbers between about 120 and 240, stand about a 50-50 chance of being drafted next year. Number 69 in the most liable group, June 13th, December 21st, September 10th, October 12th, June 17th, April 27th, May 19th, November 6th, January 28th, December 27th, October.
Welcome to the 2026 National Military Service Draft Lottery. All of you who are eligible for the draft have been given a ticket this evening as you arrived. Your number on the ticket is your draft number for the evening. In a moment, we will randomly draw 3 numbers from this box at the front. The three people whose numbers are drawn will then need to come to the stage where you will sit before the draft board for this evening. And for the evening, you will be claiming that you are a conscientious objector and that you are appealing to the draft board for that status, and are now at the point in the process where you must explain to the draft board what you believe and give evidence for those numbers. Colby, could I borrow you for a second? And can I have my 3 draft board members join us up here? Did you draw the first number? Number 642095. 642095. Six 642098. And number 642096. 096. Please come up, take your seats up there, and the draft board will begin their questions.
All right, we call to order this draft board hearing. Once it's on. There we go. We call to order this draft board hearing. You have requested conscientious objector status to avoid military service. And the purpose of this hearing is to determine whether or not your beliefs as a conscientious objector to serving in the military are sincerely held beliefs. So after hearing your testimony, this board will make a decision as to whether or not you must serve in the military in full capacity, or whether you will serve in a non-combatant role, or whether you will be allowed to serve an equivalent amount of time in some form of alternative service that benefits this country. So, for the record, let's begin. Please state your name, your age, and your hometown.
My name is Sterling Stauffer. I am 22 and I live in Canton, Kansas.
Molly Stover Brown, 21, Wichita, Kansas.
Jaden Lichty, I'm 18, from Wichita, Kansas.
All right, thank you. We're going to ask you some questions to determine your sincerity, and I'll allow my colleagues to ask the question. Each of you will be asked the question and have a short, brief time to give a succinct answer to the question.
Question number 1. Describe your beliefs, which are the reasons for your claiming conscientious objection to combatant military training and service, or to all military training and service. What are the reasons for claiming CO status?
I believe that in the Sermon on the Mount, Christ, which Jesus, gave us a clear instruction that under the new order of the law that he instituted when he came the second time, or came the first time I should say, is that we do not wage war against this world with the weapons of this world, but we wage war against the spiritual world with weapons that are not of this world.
I was born into the First Church of the Brethren Church, which is a peacemaking church denomination similar to Mennonites, if you've heard of them. And we follow Jesus' word as like the top, most important part of the Bible. And he talks about peacemaking. As Church of the Brethren, I believe, to live peacefully, simply, and together. And I also believe that we should love our enemies and not kill them. And I don't think it is physically possible in my body to kill another person. And I don't think that is a right thing to do, and Christ would not have me do that.
I was also born into the Church of the Brethren, which is under the umbrella of Anabaptism, and the two most important things here are that you should be baptized voluntarily, and you should, and no war, period. And the Brethren slogan is sort of live peacefully, simply together, and I want to live that through.
Two of you have answered how long you've held the belief, so we're going to move to, we'd like to know from your individually, explain what most clearly shows that your beliefs are deeply held. Give us a description or an illustration of how those beliefs are put into action in the way you live.
Well, an example is I hold true the conviction of not harming a fellow human being as closely as I do not harming a creature. And an example might be yesterday at my job in the building that I was working in, I found a toad. And my instinct was to, maybe some people would have thrown it out. My instinct was to find a safe place for it. And so I took it in my hand and I walked out about 1/8 of a mile to the nearest ravine where there was some water from the leftover rain, and so I dropped that toad in there, and that, without sounding like I'm sticking my head out, I'd like to say that conviction holds even in the smallest things, creatures in life. My conviction holds true for them, and so if you go all the way up to the top to human beings, there's absolutely no way I could harm another human being in that regard.
After hearing what you just said, I was remembering that I work as a special education para substitute, and in that position, I also work with the general students of like the whole school, because I'm seen as someone in authority figure role. And there have been times I worked about a full week working with kids, and there was a lot of commotion going on during recess time, and there was I didn't know what they were doing, but they seemed to all be gathered around something and like not doing something that they were supposed to be doing. And I realized that there was a bird who had laid its nest on the ground right next to the recess area, and they were harassing this bird, and it was getting really upset. And although I part of what I would say too is I find it really hard to be angry. I don't find myself being angry, and I don't find myself ever yelling, honking my horn, even if I should. I'm so peaceful that I don't do any of those things. But I found myself yelling at these students to get them away from this bird, who was obviously in so much distress because she was trying to keep her eggs safe. So that's, I guess, an example, a very small example.
So ever since I can remember, I've been going to church, and in the summers going to church camp since I was probably 3 years old. And even beyond that, I volunteer through an organization that's Brethren-led called FaithX, where I serve across the country, helping people and just living through the slogan of peacefully, simply together. And a specific example might be the fact that my friends and I often feed what people would consider rodents, like raccoons and possums, rather than exterminate them.
Well, thank you for your responses to our questions, and we're going to deliberate as a board and give you our decision about your status here shortly. Be ready whenever that comes to answer the call, one way or the other. Now, you may go and sit down.
Let's give them a round of applause. So my name is Alan Stuckey. I'm the pastor here at First Church of the Brethren, and now I want to actually welcome you here this evening to our Conscientious Objector training event. And I want to thank you all for coming to this event, because we are all concerned about the possibility of a military draft, as well as the changes that are coming to the draft registration process this year. We started the evening with a mock draft board hearing that put some of you on the spot without any preparation or warning. And at the end of the evening, we're going to have another mock draft board hearing, sort of. But by then, we hopefully you will all have learned a little bit more about what a draft would actually look like, how to prepare for a draft, and also how to actually respond to these kinds of questions. Tonight, just to give you a quick overview of the things that we are going to be doing, assuming my computer behaves, we're going to talk about the current state of the draft. We're going to talk about what happens if a draft is reinstated. We will talk about ways to build your case for conscientious objection. We will talk about, you want to hit my next button there, Jerry? Just hit the space bar. Thank you. We'll talk about the biblical case for nonviolence. We will then talk about some challenge questions or some gotcha questions that you may face as you are trying to do this. And then you will have some time to actually write out your beliefs or begin writing out some of your beliefs. And then even a chance to answer or practice these responses out loud, because actually saying them out loud is part of the process, and we need a little bit of practice for that. Before we get to the rest of the parts of these, let me say, tonight it will not just be me talking to you. We have a variety of different people who will be sharing some of the information here. Some of them are pastors, some of them are church members or other leaders in our area and congregations. Before we get going with the rest of the parts, I want you to notice two things that we've already done that are particularly important for understanding the seriousness of this situation. First, you will notice that when you came in, and I'm speaking to the young people here, you will notice that your parents, pastors, and other adults were asked to sit in the back of the room, and the young adults were asked to sit and come up front. This is partly to make it very clear that in the draft process, you are the ones who are responsible for yourselves. Yes, there are ways that others around you can support you and will support you, but when you sit in front of a draft board, there is no one else who will be able to articulate what you believe except for you. You have to know what you believe, and you have to be able to say it out loud and clearly on your own. Your pastor cannot do it for you. Your parents can't do it for you. It's yours. Secondly, there is a reason that we did not give you a warning or a choice about joining the mock draft today. If a real draft happens, you will not have warning, nor will you have a choice. If a real draft happens, these things happen very quickly. We also hope that you did feel some amount of anxiety about this, because that will very much be a part of a real draft. The difference here is that in a real draft, it is not a little bit of embarrassment that you might be facing. The answers that you give may determine if you are forced to take up weapons in war against other people to kill or be killed. That's what's at stake in our conversations for tonight. So, let's begin with where we are currently at. Current state of the draft, and Jerry Bowen is going to come share with us.
As Pastor Allen said, my name is Jerry Bowen. I am on the pastoral staff at the McPherson Church of the Brethren, and also part of an organization called Community Peacemaker Team. And this is something that we are also dealing with at that level. The current state, registration changes versus a reinstated draft. Many of us here today are here tonight because we've heard there are significant changes coming to the selective service system. Some of us may even be worried about the possibility of a draft due to all the current wars going on. To understand what's happening, we need to be clear that there are two things to be concerned about. One is an actual draft, and the other are the changes in the process registering for the draft. They are not the same thing. We first have to note that there is not currently an active draft, and there has not been one since the Vietnam War. However, since the early 80s, every male living in the United States has been required to register just in case a draft were to begin again. For most of us, that meant going to the post office, filling out a card, and then mailing it to Washington, D.C. If you didn't, there's the risk of a lot of fines, penalties, and possible jail time. Over these last 40 years or so, there have been many ways that the government has made it easier and more mandatory for people to register for the draft. If you received federal student loans, there was likely a box that you had to check that allowed the loan company to register you for the draft. Or in Kansas, if you're over the age of 18 and male, you cannot have a driver's license without also registering for the draft through the DMV. This year, beginning in December, the government passed a law mandating that instead of requiring people to actually register themselves, the government is going to automatically register all eligible males through existing governmental databases. And yeah, there are a lot of questions about what this is actually going to mean for everything, from data privacy to finding undocumented immigrants, who, by the way, will also be forced to register. There are questions, we don't necessarily have answers. That's a huge concern. The biggest concern for this evening is that this is a potential sign that other changes to the draft are in the works. There are many reasons to be concerned for the changes that are coming. The Trump administration is a particularly chaotic one, and is unpredictable by design. But more than that, there are strong forces that want the draft to happen. For example, one of the AI companies called Palantir is very powerful, and the administration listens to it and leans into it quite a bit. Palantir has recently released a plan for what they want to see in the United States that would include a mandatory draft for all draft-age people, not just some. The future is somewhat unknown. However, the possibility of a draft starting again is higher than it has been in the last 40 years. So what would that actually look like? What would it look like to have the draft start again?
My name is Colby Patton. I'm not a pastor of any kind, but I am part of the Church Brethren denominational leadership. So, green packets, right? All right, so those that have green packets, you need them for this. So what would a draft look like? In your green packet, turn to page 4 to the document that says Return to Draft. This is from the Selective Service System website and gives an outline of what would happen if a draft were to get reinstated. The first step is that a draft would have to be authorized by Congress. The president cannot just decide to have a draft on their own. Second, the Selective Service System would be activated, meaning that all of the people and infrastructure to actually run and process a draft would get going. Third would be the actual lottery system. Just like the video at the beginning, as well as our lottery system here, each day of the year gets assigned a number, and they work through the numbers until they have enough people in the military. Fourth, the people whose numbers have been called are required to report to the Military Entrance Processing Station, or MEPS. This is where everyone is evaluated physically, mentally, and morally. If you pass all of these tests, you would get onto a bus directly from that station and be taken to basic training. If you want to file as a conscientious objector, you usually have about 10 days to file your case, and from the time that you receive notice to the time that you've been drafted. It is a very quick turnaround, and it is the reason that you need to have done some of this work right now. Fifth, the local and district appeal boards, or draft boards, would get going to hear the claims for classifications of conscientious objector status, hardships, ministerial deferments, and other appeals. You can see on pages 6 and 7 the long list of deferments and exemptions. There might be reasons that you apply for different ones of these, but let's assume that you've applied to be a conscientious objector to war on moral or religious grounds. After you have completed your initial paperwork, you will eventually go before a draft board to make your case as to what you believe and why you should be exempted. After that, they will come back with their determination of your classification. There are 3 main options. The first being 1A, which is a full military service. 1AO, which is what we call non-combatant, someone in the military but not in a role that requires them to carry a weapon. And finally, 1W, which is a conscientious objector who will be assigned to do 24 months of alternative service. And yes, this means that if you are drafted and found eligible, even if you are a conscientious objector, you'll be spending the next 2 years of your life in some sort of service that you had not planned on doing. So, are there questions at this point in time? All right. So now the question is, what does it look like to actually put your case through the draft board?
Good evening. My name is Wilmer Harder, and I serve as pastor at Buhler Mennonite Church in Buhler, Kansas. And yes, this is very important to me as well, as both my great-grandfather, grandfather, and father went through this process, and we were trained to do this too. And in our lifetime, we never were in the draft, and yet we are prepared. I'm still at age 50 thinking I'm going to be drafted. So, but this is important. Even even though, like in my lifetime, it hasn't happened, it's important. So what does it look like to build a practical case for you as conscience objectors? There are different organizations and church denominations that have really good packets. So whether it's Church of the Brethren, or Mennonite Church, or any other church, they have some very good ones. On their websites, church websites, you have resources as well. They're all great, and they are based on two key principles. The first principle you've heard already, but it's incredibly important. Every single one of us, you as an individual, needs to know what you believe, or what we believe, but it has to come from you personally, and why you believe it, and be able to clearly articulate that. We had a selective service person come to one of our conferences, youth conferences, and one of the points they made was, in the past, if you came from a peace church, a traditional peace church like Church of the Brethren or Mennonite, you almost had a sort of trump card to build your case. But they argued that that might not necessarily be the case anymore, that it is based on your personal conviction. Now, how are they going to determine that? Well, you have to be able to prove that you actually believed for a while the things that you are now telling the draft board, like up there. Words are cheap, right? They want to know, is this real, or are you just finding a way out? And then, do you live it out? Is that the fruit that you bear? If you take a look at page 10, there's that red on the bottom of who qualifies. And could I get somebody on this side here just to read that out loud, the red print there? Just read it out loud.
Beliefs which qualify a registrant for CO status, conscientious objector status, may be religious in nature but don't have to be. Beliefs may be moral or ethical. However, a man's reasons for not wanting to participate in a war must not be based on politics, expediency, or self-interest. In general, the man's lifestyle prior to making his claim must reflect his current claims.
Now, I'm going to give a caveat to that because it was using man language, he language, but we already heard that it's been changed to people. And that was another thing that the Selective Service told us 10 years ago already, and that is women, females, you should be prepared to do the same thing, even though that traditionally and historically women have not been part of the draft. So what the draft board is looking for is whether your beliefs are actually sincere and really do shape your life. Or are you just making it up as a convenient way to get out of going to the military? If they're sincere, then there should be evidence of those beliefs, and that's what we're going to talk about here, meaning it should show a change in your life. It means that other people, if they went and asked your parents or your friends, hey, is this guy really a conscious objector, or a person is really a conscious objector, they would say, that person? No, he's constantly stabbing people and robbing them. Then they'd probably say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't match up. So they're going to ask people, background checks, is this the person you know? Hopefully it matches up. It also means that there's some sort of proof that you have believed this for longer than 5 minutes. You didn't just come up with it right now. Now, there are three things that basically, and you can see that if you turn the page there, there are three parts of putting together a file. The first are your written responses to these three questions on page 13, page 14, and page 15. As you write these responses, you want to keep the statements very personal. And you want to do this ahead of time, or at least think it through. You might refresh it over time. Your reasoning might deepen or it might broaden, but you want to write this down. You want to write it down personally. Like not just some theory, but like how does it affect you personally? I thought our people did a very good job of that. Connecting your life and your beliefs as you hold them. Yes, you can, and probably should reference scripture and church statements, but connect them back to examples in your life. You want to keep them focused on your objection to war and military service. So a reason like my dad said it's not good because we're Mennonite probably isn't going to fly. You want to connect it to you. Why you? You don't have to solve all the world's problems because the board will come after you on that. They'll ask you all sorts of questions and push and prod you. But just say what you can and can't do because this is about your conscience. I simply can't do it based on my conscience. Also, be clear about the nature and the depth of your beliefs. They need to be deeply held and have a central role in your life. And we're going to repeat that over and over again, but that is so incredibly important. Also talk about the present. These need to be beliefs that you have here and now, not just something that are hand-me-downs from the parents or your church. They're yours, here and now. That's important. So that's something you need to do. Answer these questions and put them on file. The second thing is a collection of reference letters from people who have known you for a long time. They can be mentors, teachers, pastors, maybe even someone who disagrees with you but respects your position and sees that you are genuine about it. But they shouldn't be people that you are related to closely. So like your mom or your dad, you know. It's not bad that they back you up on that, but get people that know you from out in the world. In your packet, if you take a look, there are sample letters on, let's say page 17 is a sample letter of what those letters might look like. Reference letters, it's just like a job, your reference letters. You can send to someone asking them for a reference letter for yourself. And for adults, in some of those packets, there's also advice on how to write a reference letter to a youth who might be requesting that for you. So, you're going to answer these questions and put them on file. You are going to collect reference letters from people who have known you for a while. And then the third thing to include in your file is any other document that you can gather to support your case. A copy of your baptismal certificate showing that you have made a public profession of faith. A newspaper or magazine articles reporting on peace or service activities that you have done. Copies of term papers, speeches, blogs, anything that you can put on there that relate to being a conscientious objector that you have written, that already documents that you have, this is a consistent theme in your life. Anything that you can collect that can add as evidence that you have held these beliefs strongly and for a long time will help. So the checklist is, again, and you're going to gather this all together and you're going to keep it, is written responses to the 3 questions, letters of recommendation from other people, and any other evidence that you have been holding this for a while, so you have a trail of evidence. Now, once you've gathered these documents, you want to make copies of them, so that not just you are holding on to them, and you want to send them to multiple other places and people who can store a copy for you. So like your local church, like at our local church, people who have filled this out will put them on file, and we have it on file as well. Mennonite Central Committee has a database, and I think we have examples of that in our packet where you can send that. The Church of the Brethren denominational issues. Offices will also store those as well. You want multiple copies at other places so that if something happens to yours or to the cloud or wherever, then you will be able to have the copies you need. Now there's some creative ways also to make sure that you get this documented. Here's an example. Send an extra copy to yourself through the mail, like in a packet. But you want to send it through registered mail. Send it through registered mail so there's a whole chain of, they can tell when you sent it, not why you sent it, but that it was sent. But don't open it, just keep it. Because it's sealed then, it'll record when you put this together. So let's say if there's a draft in 5 years, you can look at it and say, hey, look, I already held this belief. I didn't just put this packet together 5 minutes ago. I've had this on file already for 5 years. So you can present a sealed envelope with all the documentation that has an official record of the time and date proving when you actually wrote your statement of beliefs. I'm going to add one more that's not on here. Sorry, I'm going off script. One of the things they often told us was back when you back when we had to actually write the paper out, we didn't have the option to put on there we're conscious objectors. Now most of you don't even have the option to fill out the paper. What I would do is write the selective service a letter that says, I am a conscientious objector. And then most likely, if you're lucky, you're going to get a letter back that says, hey, why are you doing this? This isn't even an option. Boom, you're on record. You've got a paper trail. If they don't send anything back, request it from them. Say, hey, I sent you something. Can you verify that you got it from me? And then if they send you something back, boom, you've got record that you are, that you're in the paperwork trail somehow. So, and then you put that in your folder as well. Any questions, comments? Maybe other creative, yes. Yes, absolutely. I would say do it tomorrow already. Oh, would it be a benefit for people to start working on it this summer already? Yes, absolutely. Even if you're not even if you're not of selective service age yet. I kind of freaked out somebody that was in 7th grade in our church because I made an announcement that even they should be at this event. They're like, are we getting drafted? No, but you want to prepare this already, and the longer you can document this, the better, stronger case you have. So good point. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'll say one thing on that before Catherine comes up. You're actually going to start working on it tonight. You don't know that yet. Also, on the list of, Wilmer didn't say it, but on the list of things that you can prove, you can put down to prove that, to build your case, tonight's event is one of those things that you should add to that, to say, I attended this Conscientious Objector event. So, yeah. Catherine?
We should maybe have everyone stand in front of the camera and say their names and document it.
Yes, we can do that. Speaking of the camera, I will also mention this is being recorded and it's online right now. So I know there's a group of people who are watching us online. So welcome to you, either today or in the future.
My name is Catherine Gorzin. I am one of the pastors at Tabor Mennonite Church, which is rural Newton, Kansas. So far tonight, we've talked about the current state of the draft, what a draft could look like, and how to prepare a file for a draft. But what is it that we actually believe as Christians in terms of using violence? Maybe this is something you've thought about a lot, and I was very impressed with the three of you who came up tonight. It was clear to me, yes, you have given this thought, so well done. Maybe it's something that you've heard other people in church talk about from time to time. Maybe you're aware that there are denominations known as peace churches, but maybe you're not quite sure what this means. There is a very long history of what it means to be a peace church over the last several hundred years. There are even a number of different types of pacifism that people might believe in, and you can see some descriptions of types of pacifism on pages 31 and 32 in your packet. Different churches and different people have lived out their beliefs in peace and nonviolence in a range of different ways. But wherever you wind up, it all really starts in one place. We are Christians. We believe that Jesus is Lord. We believe that Jesus is God in human form. And the Bible states that Jesus is the one who most fully reveals who God is. And if this is what we believe, that Jesus is the clearest way for us to know who God is and what God is like and what God wants us to do as Christians, then we need to try to be as much like Jesus as we can be, as Jesus is Lord of our lives. This means that Jesus' life, teachings, death, and resurrection all show us how we should live our lives as people who follow Jesus. So when it comes to the questions of how or if we should use violence as people who follow Jesus, when reading through the Gospels and seeing how Jesus chose to live, the message is pretty clear. In his life, Jesus was someone who extended grace to people and called us to love our enemies, doing the same that he did. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus would say, "You have heard that it was said that you should take an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evildoer violently by evil means. And you have heard that it was said that you should love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you that you should love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Even in his own death, he lived out these teachings. When people came to arrest him and his followers took out their swords to defend him, to stop them from doing this, Jesus told them to put their sword back. Do not fight on his behalf. When others tried to kill him, he himself, even though he could have commanded down legions of angels to fight on his behalf, he did not do this, and violence was allowed to be carried out on him instead of him defending himself. Even when he was dying on the cross, he used one of his last breaths to pray to God that God would forgive those who were killing him. Even in his death, he did not want this cycle of violence to continue. Jesus brings peace to the world by not using violence to destroy others, but by willingly succumbing to violence and giving up his own life for others. As people who believe Jesus is Lord, this means he is Lord of our lives, and we are called to follow his teachings and examples of love and service for others, even those who would do us harm. That is the basis for all Christian beliefs in nonviolence. And there are many other stories and scriptures in the Bible that people can point to and talk about, but it all really starts with Jesus. Jesus taught and proclaimed and lived a nonviolent life. To be Christian means we live the same way. That is why we can't participate in the military and we can't take life. And I love how it was even extended to not just human lives, but we have respect for all life. I loved those stories, by the way. This is the core of the peace belief for us, as it was the core belief of peace teachings for the first disciples and the first Christians that followed Jesus. If you look at page 23 in your packet, you will see multiple scriptures of peace. This is not an exhaustive list. There are many more. There are some from the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures, but we see this especially in the Gospels and in the New Testament, people who committed their lives to following Jesus, saying that to be a Christian means to live with love for all and to live at peace with everyone. For the first 300 years or so of the early church, the assumed belief was that if you are Christian, you cannot use violence. In fact, during that time, if you were a soldier and you wanted to join the church, you were required to give up your job and leave the military in order to be a part of the church. This is all to say that the Christian case for rejecting the use of violence and refusing to participate in the military is not a particularly complicated one. Everything that Jesus taught and did was to give us the message that using violence is incompatible with being Christian. We believe he meant all of it, and that he was talking to us, not for some future age, but for now, today. And as Christians, we have an obligation to try and live this way. If you are working on figuring out what you believe, based on your religion, based on what you read in the Bible, or you're looking for a place to start when answering some of these questions, starting with Jesus is a good foundation. And you can add in scriptures and personal experiences that support this core belief. Any questions that you have? Yes. Thank you. Okay, so the pages where you find the scripture references are on 18. Thank you for pointing that out. Great, thank you. Yeah, good catch. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yes. You could use the Bible to justify almost anything by picking out verses and pointing, well, here it is, right here in the Bible. But as Christians and Anabaptists who believe that Jesus is Lord, I believe that also means that Jesus is Lord over the scriptures. And as Jesus most fully reveals who God is, and Jesus chose to live a nonviolent life, that is where we look first and foremost. Otherwise, you could use the Bible to justify polygamy, slavery, kind of whatever you want, just by picking and choosing. But the overarching story, Jesus is Lord of life, scriptures, Jesus reveals who God is. So yeah, that's why we look to him.
That's actually a very wonderful transition to the next section. So it's a good thing for us to sit and think through our beliefs when we have time to actually sit and write them down. However, there's going to be times where people want to challenge our beliefs, and they're going to do it out of the blue. And we have to figure out short responses. Now, there may be times when our explanation does not satisfy them. We may give them our biblical understanding, and they still want to push back. They might ask us some, you could call them gotcha questions, as a way to trip us up and trap us so that we go back on our beliefs, or show that, well, you don't really believe what you say you do. Now, these challenges might come from a friend or someone else that we know. I've certainly had them in my sports life over the years. But if you appear before a draft board, you may also get these kinds of questions where they try and trip you up. They ask more questions than just the 3 that we had today. And they're trying to push you to see if you really do believe what you say you do and if you've thought through these. So the question is, how do we respond? On pages 21 to 24 of your packet, you'll find some ways to respond when someone challenges your beliefs. Now, believe me, this is not an exhaustive list of challenge questions, nor is it an exhaustive list of answers. It's important to remember that many times when someone is challenging you on your belief of peace, that they don't actually want a genuine conversation. Right? There are some times where people are just trying to stick it to you. And quite frankly, a pithy one-liner is just the best response. You can see that there are some biblical one-liners in your packet as well that are handy to have memorized. Or you might see things like the Church of the Brethren phrases of no force in religion or all war is sin, which are phrases that we have had for 100 years or more. One of the best one-line responses comes from a Brethren bumper sticker, which I've seen, which said, when Jesus says, love your enemies, he probably meant don't kill them. This response not only defends your belief, but it also actually exposes the fact that the person advocating for the use of violence, is actually the one out of step with Jesus, not you. And depending on the situation, and depending on how snarky you want to be, to drive home the point, you might make it a little bit more explicitly tied to war. For example, I have said to many people, when Jesus said, love your enemies, he probably meant don't blow them up with a drone or shoot them in the face, right? Sometimes, however, there are some people who want to have a conversation and who are genuinely asking about your beliefs in a more genuine way. Sometimes they bring up challenges to our beliefs that are seemingly quite good points and could potentially leave us without a response. Most of these questions, however, are not new. These are questions that pacifists have been asked for generations. Most of the questions that people ask to challenge beliefs in nonviolence have been around forever. And as such, there are answers that can and should be given in response, and have for a very long time. So on that same list, on that same sheet, you can see a list of typical challenge questions and responses that you can give to them. Some of the questions are based around particular parts of the Bible. They're these scriptural pushback questions. Well, but Jesus did this, or the Old Testament says this. Other times, they're just simply questions that challenge the sincerity or consistency of our beliefs. What would you do if someone was trying to hurt a loved one? It's one that most all of us have heard. At times when people ask these questions, they may be trying to trap us, but they may also genuinely be wanting to understand. Either way, when people ask questions like this, we need to have a thoughtful and clear answer to their questions. And I'm not going to go through all of those questions and responses, but spend some time with that list and those responses. Maybe there are questions here that you have already had. Maybe there are questions that you have thought about but have not had an answer to. Either way, these are important questions that we all need to have thought about and be ready to answer when they come up. So, now you get to work. Jerry?
Take a deep breath, because now the real work begins. You've been sitting, you've listened, you've received a lot of information, you're trying to process it all. It's a lot, we know. But now we want to give you an opportunity to take all that you've heard and put it into some kind of tangible, practical piece of literature. In your packets on pages 13, 14, and 15, there are sheets that are open for you to answer the 3 key questions the draft board are going to present to you. In the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to ask that you write out the answers to these questions. We also are fully aware this may be more writing than many of you have done by hand. It's called a pen. So if you feel more comfortable using your phones, do so. If you have a laptop or Chromebook handy, you may do that as well. Whatever you have to write down your responses, we give you 15 minutes or so to do so. Let's get to work.
Do any of our young people need a pen or a writing utensil? Hopefully you know what that is. If they're not, there are more back there. How many adults here do not have one of the green packets? If you would like to have one of those, I would encourage you to get one, and there's some pens back there. These are also good things for you all to be writing down as well. So let's take some time, we'll hang out, and then we'll come back together. If the people online are watching this, they should have gotten the link through a Google form. That in that Google form there is a link to a file folder with all of the main packet information in there, and those questions should be in there as well. So we are going to have another mock draft board, kind of. We're not going to bring people up here. You all are going to get to participate. So we have the 3 questions up above that the young people have in their packets that they have been writing on. I would like you all to partner up and find someone else that you can give these answers. You can just read what you've been writing. That's fine, but I want you to practice saying them out loud. So ask the question to each other. And like I said, the adults can play with this as well. Please find somebody who you don't live with and who you may not even know their name, right? So if you came in the same car with somebody, don't partner up with them. So find somebody else, and we'll give you a few minutes. Answer these questions. What do you believe? How did you come to those beliefs? And what is the evidence for it? And we'll take another 5 or 10 minutes. Go. So you all have been through the ringer tonight. We have thrown a whole load of hay, especially at the young people here. We've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully it's been helpful information and you at least feel somewhat more prepared than when you came here tonight. There's been a lot of information, but we can sum up the message of tonight pretty clearly. Whether it's in front of a draft board or sitting around talking with some of your friends, your job is to know what you believe, know why you believe it, and have the words to explain it. The core biblical reason to hold these beliefs on peace and nonviolence is this. Everything that Jesus did, said, and taught shows us that God wants us to reject the use of violence at all levels of our lives. We believe then that we must do everything in our power to live by his teachings and example in everything we do. Know why you believe it, do what Jesus told you to do. Everything else pretty much grows out of those two things. Tonight, before we get out of here, we want to make sure that you have a chance, especially the young people have a chance to ask any questions that you have not gotten an answer for today. You may have come here with questions, and if the kids don't have any more questions, if there are questions for adults as well, you can ask those as well. Colby has a microphone, and just raise your hand. We want to use a microphone so that the people online can hear it. That's how they hear the system. So are there questions, especially with this section?
Hey, Alan, will you make all of our contact information available? So, I mean, I saw there was a list of resources, but you have my permission to add my name to that as well.
Yes. So in those green packets, the last page has a short list of people who I was able to contact ahead of time. There may be things that come up in the future. You may have questions, you may want to talk more, you may want to ask more questions. Or even in the event of a draft board, you may want people to show up and support you at those kinds of things. Those are all people that you can call on there. I'm going to ask adults, I didn't make a list of this, but if you are willing to be one of those contact people, I'm going to have you write down your contact information, address, email, that kind of stuff. And then we will send that out as well. I am also planning on making all of this information available to anybody who wants it as well. Colby.
So my question is, basically, is the end game, the classification sheet on page 6 and 7, 1W service, that's something that is, a lot of my relatives ended up filing for. Is that essentially the best possible scenario of conscientious objection filing?
So there is another classification in there, which is 1O, which is just pure conscientious objector. I'm not entirely sure what that would mean for alternative service. There are many people who have in previous drafts have been classified that way. Some of those people would just be out of the military service altogether. Most of the conscientious objectors in the draft would get put into alternative service. And yeah, if they're trying to get service of national importance to you, out of you for a couple of years, 1W is probably the way that they would classify you, most likely. Again, all of this is based on what's currently on the Selective Service website and information and what's happened in the past. Some of that is a question going forward, at least it is for me.
It would basically be based off of what the board deems you can do or what
Yes.
you can
Yeah.
or cannot do.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, piggybacking off of his, just theoretically, then with the alternative service, is that something the military would provide, or like our relatives did more of like Mennonite
Yes.
service? Is there a plan?
So I will give you the answer of what has happened in the past and what currently exists. So Mennonite Voluntary Service or Brethren Volunteer Service, and I believe the Quakers have a version of this as well. There are also other religious denominations. The Jesuits have their own service, which is Catholic version or a Catholic subsect, have their own service organization similar to that as well. Those organizations got their origin in World War II, when the reason that Mennonites, Quakers, and brethren are called peace churches is because in the lead up to World War II, there was a delegation of those three denominations or wider groups that went to Washington to talk with the president and say, listen, World War I was really bad for conscientious objectors who got drafted. There were people who died in military camps and all kinds of stuff. How can we still remain true to our conscience, but serve the country in a different way? And so they said, well, we'll let you do this, but you have to set up those structures. So those different denominations set up those different structures for building dams or jumping out of planes to fight fires or a whole bunch of other things. But those were all run and funded by those denominations. They were not set up by the U.S. government. I mean, there was oversight and accreditation of some sort for that, but it was all run by the churches. And then those denominations said, this is still a pretty good idea, so let's keep doing it. And we have for the last 80 years or whatever. So this is one of those things that I would point to the adults, or you're all adults, but the older adults, who are like on church boards and things. Colby. She's on our denominational board. But the question is, if a draft happens and we need alternative we have people who are going into alternative service, are our denominational alternative service structures robust enough and prepared for an influx of people who would be coming from within our denomination or from the outside as well? So that's a question for y'all to start asking right now, right? So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Jade?
Worst case scenario, can I just, instead of attending college here, just move to Canada?
Oh, hey, now we got some fun history. Yes, there are people who have gone to, in previous wars, there are people who have gone to Canada to avoid the draft. That is a whole thing that has been done. One of the realities is the military wants compliant people who aren't going to infect the rest of the platoon. So if you are adamant enough about your beliefs and annoying enough, they may not want you around, right? So that's part of what we're hopefully training you to do. But yes, yes, we're training you to be annoying with a conscience. So, but yes, there are people who have done that. There will likely be consequences for that are unforeseen, or in some cases known, that the U.S. government won't be real happy about that. So you got to come back home at some point. Yeah, it's not as easy to get through border stuff as it used to be. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a few questions. One of them is we've kind of already talked about it, but if you go through the conscientious objection thing, they then decide if you're class whatever or the other one. But then would a third option be they're like, oh, your brethren do that thing? Is that what you were saying?
So if they classify as 1W, that would be a conscientious objector doing alternative service. And so then they could say, go into Brethren Volunteer Service, and that counts as your service for being drafted.
So for brethren, it would be the Brethren Volunteer Service, or would Christians Peacemaker Team be another one, or is that different?
That's a good question. I don't know how CPT would actually relate to selective service at this point, because I'm not sure that they existed when the last time there was a draft. So that's an unknown question.
Another one would be, I've heard people talk about how being a conscientious objector, that's kind of a mouthful to say. They have gone to jail because of that. Is that something that we would maybe face as well?
Depends on the situation. There are certainly people who burned their draft cards or wanted to make a more significant protest. They have done that. So, for example, up until this point with registration, and this is one of the changes that's happening with automatic registration, if you wanted to resist participation even in the registration process, you could theoretically do that. It would be very hard. You would not have access to things like federal housing loans, federal student loans, a whole bunch of other things like having a federal job, working for the post office, things like that. On the list of consequences is fines and jail time. So depending on how big of a stink you wanted to make about that, that would be one of the options right now that you could face.
And then my last question is, if we like have a disability or something, in terms of the timeline, if we already know we have a disability, that they would not
They would
take
sort
us
that. They
for,
would sort
how
that
would
out
they-
at the entrance facility, and so when you're assessed for physical readiness and mental readiness and moral readiness, that's when they would determine if you have some physical disability that would disqualify you from military service. It would be in that entrance processing. Yep.
So, but before you even get to that, you should still be a CO. Before then, that might happen, and you may not end up having to go into the service.
You would go through that processing, where then they would determine, that's where you would say, I want to be a conscientious objector, or they would say, oh, in your physical, yeah, you've got whatever physical ailment or disability that disqualifies you or whatever. So all of those things happen at the same time in the same place.
I actually have one more question.
Yep.
In relation to 1W service, what do you know exactly what that would encompass? I mean, I know it's a pretty wide array of jobs, but for some of us, it could come down to a minute theological, in your mind. If I scoop a shovel, is that going to pave a road, to let a truck come that's going to carry soldiers to, how far, even if it's varying degrees of separation from the front lines, a person could argue that 1W service is still, enabling a trigger to be pulled.
Yeah, and that's where the individual conscience comes in. And that is a decision that that you would need to make on what you are willing to do and not do. And so in the same way that some people would say, I'm willing to be in the military but not hold a gun, but I'll be a medic or something like that, you can parse that at every step of the way down. You may say, actually, even doing alternative service still supports the war machine, right? And then you may choose to do something else. So, yeah, that's a decision of what are you willing to do? What is your conscience going to let you do or not? And then how are you going to make that case?
But the consequences might be very,
yes.
There might be a point where they say you have no option.
Yes.
You sit in prison for it.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yep.
Are you able to somehow fabricate a moral or physical disability when they're testing you?
To fabricate one?
Yeah.
That's above my pay grade. Fabricating would be, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I would not be the expert on that. I would rely more on what you actually believe, rather than trying to come up with something. Yes. Yep.
I just wanted to say something because my dad did voluntary service. He was a conscientious objector. And I just encourage people that it's not like a bad thing to do. I think it changed his life for a good thing. And it's not something that's like, oh man, I got to go do 2 years of voluntary service. It was good for him. He got off the farm, he went into the city and saw a different life. So I just encourage people to not be afraid of that.
Yeah, I mean, we can point to examples of how the conscientious objector experience, especially in World War II, has fundamentally changed our world. So one that we can point to are the Minnesota starvation experiments, which is a group of young men who volunteered to be very carefully starved to the brink of their physical abilities, and then were tested on how do you bring somebody back effectively, which mattered in World War II when all of a sudden they found a lot of people in concentration camps who were in the same situation, and then they were able to bring people back. Another huge thing is one of the places that a lot of COs were sent were, at the time, would have been called insane asylums, essentially mental health. We call them mental health facilities now. But there was a huge influx of Mennonites and Brethren and pacifists who went into situations where people were being treated horribly and where people were essentially being warehoused. And lo and behold, they treated them with dignity and they started getting better. That experience of those conscientious objectors turned into things like Prairie View, which is a mental health facility in Newton. And ultimately, there was a whole generation of mental health professors who, or not professors, but for professionals and doctors who changed the face of mental health treatment fundamentally. And anything that we think of remotely in terms of treatment of that stems to conscientious objectors in World War II. And so, yes, the kinds of things that you would do for alternative service are worth doing in and of themselves. So, absolutely. Yes, back yonder.
I would like to comment that I wish I had had the chance that you young people have.
Just hold it to your mouth. There you go.
In 1971, I was married, had a young daughter, dropped out of college to support my family, and was immediately sent to get my physical. 30 days later, I was in boot camp, and I was 22 years old at the time. When I reached my first station of service in Millington, Tennessee, I went to Memphis State University and found a young man that had gone through conscientious objector discharge. He was an E5, which was a staff sergeant in the Army. And I told him that I was a CO. But at the time, we didn't have this opportunity to get the facts, and we didn't have a pastor, we didn't have a youth minister, and so I just felt lost. So I went ahead and went to boot camp, went to my first destination, went to Memphis State University, and he told me exactly what to do to file for conscientious objector. 4 months later, I was out with an honorable discharge because of my experience with the Church of the Brethren and my father, who was working with young people, trying to help them along in their lives. And so I was very fortunate to be in that position. And I wish I'd had this opportunity that you young folks have today.
Which Barney has some wonderful historic documents that I can, if you want to see what he actually, how he defended these questions when he was getting out of the military, it's pretty amazing. The other thing that I will mention, 201, the second level of this, is also there are a whole set of resources for people who are in the military already and who want to get out. And there's a whole world of that we can talk about more. But are there other questions? So I want to thank you again for, oh, we got one more, sorry.
I think just last week or so, they were talking about reducing the number of religions that are recognized by the military. Does that, do you know how that affects this, or does it affect this at all? Because I know that the only one that is currently recognized in that new list is Quaker as far as peace churches goes.
I hadn't looked very closely at that list.
Mennonite was not, and the Amish were not, but Quakers and Church of the Brethren were on the list.
Yeah, they went from like 120, 130, 150, something like that, to 18 or something like that. This is not the first time we've fallen into other denominations category. That's what I would assume. In the same way that conscientious objector is not a status you can claim, but we're still going to. I mean, we're going to stand on that ground no matter what, whether it's an official document or not. So.
I'll wear my community peacemaking team hat. I'm on the steering committee for the organization, and though it's a global outreach, this is on our radar.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are not ignoring the realities that these changes are happening, and we're aware that we may need to find ways to help young people and partner with other organizations. So, and because we are no longer a Christian, but we're a nonprofit, we feel like that gives us more opportunities to really speak to what's going on.
Yep. They've broadened their mission recently. So again, I want to say thank you for coming tonight. And especially for our young people, I want to say this. As you go from here, remember that yes, even though you have to know what you believe for yourself, I also want you to know that you're not alone. You have people in churches and whole communities who will stand by your side and walk through this with you no matter what happens. At the end of the packet, we already talked about this. There are people who you can get in contact with for more questions. But also remember that now is the time to put this packet together, to answer these questions, get letters of recommendations, put that evidence file together. And also just a reminder that once you have those collected, make copies of them and send them to various places, including yourself. Tonight, I want to end our time together with a prayer. Would you pray with me? Dear Lord, send us from this place as messengers of your gospel of peace. Give us courage and strength to stand before others when our lives are even on the line. Give us wisdom and words to speak when we are asked what we believe. And give us a faithful community to walk this road with together. We pray all of this in the name of your Son, the Prince of Peace, Jesus, who is the Christ. Amen. Thank you for coming. Go in peace.